The conveyor-belt illusion picture a massive echoing warehouse. Inside, millions of packages are flying down conveyor belts at lightning speed. The warehouse owner just stands back. His hands are buried deep in his pockets. He shrugs and says, "I don't look inside the boxes, I just move them." For 2 decades, that is exactly how the internet's most powerful companies have operated. They claim they were just the conveyor belt, neutral messengers, invisible empty pipes. Whether an app handed you a funny viral video or fed a vulnerable teenager a steady diet of harmful content, the platform's legal defense was always identical. We just host it. We are not responsible. It was an impenetrable shield, a perfect, incredibly profitable system. It allowed tech giants based thousands of miles away to quietly beam their algorithms right into your living room, completely untouched by local laws. Until a few days ago. Deep inside a European courtroom, a panel of judges was looking at a highly obscure, fiercely localized dispute. It was a squabble over a French phone app. An app simply designed to warn drivers about roadside police checks. It seemed trivial, almost boring. But buried deep in the fine print of that mundane ruling was a legal landmine. A single, quiet conclusion just shattered the neutral pipe illusion forever. The court looked at the mechanics of the internet and realized something incredibly profound. When a company's algorithm actively decides what gets pushed to the top of your feed, it is no longer just moving the boxes. It is sorting them, prioritizing them. It is making a choice. And more importantly, it is in control. Just like that, a minor traffic dispute has opened a massive, continent-wide crack in the foundation of the global web, leaving the world to watch exactly what happens when a supposedly innocent algorithm is finally dragged out of the shadows and forced to take the stand.
And, that total structural failure of the whole digital warehouse defense, it actually really starts with the specific mechanics of that French app, the Coyote system, because to understand how a massive legal paradigm shifts, we kind of have to look at the granular operational details of what the software was actually doing in the real world.
Yeah, because this wasn't some giant global social media company, right? It was just a geolocation service.
Exactly. It was a French app that relied heavily on crowdsourced data. So drivers were out there using the app's interface to actively ping the GPS coordinates whenever they saw an active police checkpoint.
Like speed traps or DUI stops.
Right. And the app would take that data, aggregate it, process it, and then broadcast it to other users in the area. So it was effectively mapping out law enforcement operations in real time and giving people alternate routes.
Which I imagine the French government was not thrilled about.
They stepped in and argued that this specific feature actively obstructed law enforcement. They said it was a tangible threat to public security, especially if they were running operations trying to intercept organized crime or terrorism suspects.
So how did the app defend itself?
Well, when the legal challenge hit, the company immediately pulled out that classic conveyor belt defense.
Yeah.
They basically said, hey, we are just the invisible infrastructure. We're an empty vessel.
The warehouse owner with his hands in his pockets.
They argued that because their users generated the initial GPS ping and other users were the ones consuming that data, the platform itself had no editorial intent. They claimed they weren't actively participating in helping anyone evade the police.
And my understanding is that defense, it relies really heavily on the super early foundational texts of internet regulation, right?
Yeah.
Specifically, the European Union's e-commerce directive, which was written way back around, the year 2000?
Yeah, right around then. And you have to remember, back then, legislators were absolutely terrified of stifling this new digital economy.
So they created these really rigid, almost formal legal categories to protect companies.
Right. You're either a mere conduit, which is like a telecom provider just laying down fiber optic cable, or you were a hosting provider, which was basically just a server farm renting out hard drive space to people.
And the consensus for over 20 years was that if you fell into one of those passive buckets, you had an absolute shield against liability for whatever data moved through your systems. As long as you didn't actually know about illegal activity and then failed to remove it.
The notice and takedown system. And Coyote was basically trying to wrap itself in that year 2000 definition of a passive host, even though they were running this highly sophisticated real-time data processing machine.
Right, which feels like a bit of a stretch.
Because applying a year 2000 legal framework to a modern algorithmic system, it ignores the fact that information delivery has completely evolved. It's not about passive storage anymore. It's about active curation.
And the Court of Justice of the European Union, the CJEU, they finally recognized that disconnect.
They did. They looked at how Coyote actually worked and said, no, you are not merely storing data. The system takes raw user reports, mathematically evaluates them based on proximity and time, consolidates them, and then dynamically draws a brand new informational layer onto a map.
It's actively prioritizing who needs to see what and when.
And that curation, the act of pushing specific data to drivers who are actively driving toward those coordinates, the court said that constitutes a material act of control over the information.
Oh, so they're saying the algorithm isn't just a filing cabinet, it's making operational choices.
Right. The court laid it down clearly. When you design an algorithm to process, rank, and distribute user data to achieve a specific outcome, like rerouting traffic, your legal status as a passive intermediary instantly evaporates.
So the second the algorithm stops just storing the boxes and starts deciding, hey, you need to see this specific box right now, the platform is on the hook for what happens next. But I mean, that legal evolution gets exponentially more complicated when we move from algorithms that just sort human data to algorithms that, just autonomously write brand new stuff entirely.
The generative AI jump.
Right, because we are seeing this play out right now in Germany. The Munich Regional Court just put out an injunction against Google that basically torches that passive intermediary shield for generative AI.
Yeah, that case is fascinating. It's all about Google's AI overviews.
The thing that pops up at the top of a search and tries to just answer your questions so you don't have to click any links.
And the precipitating event in that Munich case really exposes the fatal flaw of using a large language model as an authoritative search engine. Basically, two independent publishers in Munich sued because the AI overview just spontaneously started linking their companies to straight-up fraud.
It just accused them of crimes out of nowhere.
Yeah, the generated text explicitly said these publishers were running subscription traps and engaging in all these dubious, highly unethical business practices.
But the crazy part, and this is the crux of the whole legal argument, right? The actual search links underneath the AI text didn't say that.
If you ignored the AI and just scrolled down to the traditional blue links, those allegations of fraud weren't anywhere in the search results for those companies. The underlying indexed web pages did not contain the defamation.
So the machine just hallucinated the defamation completely on its own.
Because from a computer science standpoint, an LLM isn't retrieving a document from a file, it's just doing math. It's a probabilistic calculation.
Right.
It read some text somewhere about subscription traps done by completely different companies, mapped how those words are linguistically close to the publishing industry in general, and just guessed that smashing them together with the names of these Munich plaintiffs sounded statistically plausible.
It basically authored a totally fabricated reality. And Google, predictably, tried to use that old conveyor belt defense, right?
They went into the Munich court and tried to say, look, AI overviews are just an extension of traditional search. They argued they're just providing a navigation aid.
Which means they wanted the user to take the blame.
They said the ultimate burden is on the user. The user's supposed to click the little citation links and cross-reference the AI's claims against the primary sources.
So they were basically arguing for a doctrine of, user-assumed risk. Just trying to stay a neutral conduit, even though they fundamentally changed how the information is delivered.
And the Munich Regional Court systematically took that argument apart. They focused entirely on the difference between retrieval and creation.
Okay, let me jump in with an analogy here, because I think it clarifies this shift from the tech side to the legal side perfectly. So if we look at a traditional search engine like a librarian, right? The legal immunity makes total sense. You walk into a library, you ask for a book on something, and the librarian just hands you a stack of books written by other people.
Right. They just point you to the shelf.
And if one of those books has a defamatory lie in it, the librarian obviously isn't legally liable. Their job is just organizational. But a generative AI model is not a librarian. It acts way more like an autonomous ghostwriter.
Yeah.
You ask a question, and instead of pointing to a source, the ghostwriter goes into a back room, reads thousands of books, synthesizes the concepts, and then writes a brand new original essay just for you. And it presents it with this absolute authoritative voice. So the legal rules for the librarian just logically cannot apply to the ghostwriter. If the ghostwriter's brand new essay has a made-up defamatory lie in it, the ghostwriter, or the company that hired the ghostwriter, is totally liable for the new text they brought into the world.
And the court agreeing with that logic, recognizing the AI as an active author, it completely wrecks some of the oldest defenses the tech sector has, especially the flood of data argument.
The idea that they process too much stuff to possibly be responsible for any of it.
That defense grew out of the early web based on the sheer volume of content. Platforms would say, hey, we process petabytes of data every second. If you make us proactively liable for every single piece of information, the internet would just break. It'd be economically impossible to operate.
Basically claiming broad legal immunity was a structural necessity just to handle the fire hose of data.
But the Munich court completely rejected applying that defense to generative AI because they separated the core infrastructure from the commercial product built on top of it.
Because you can still use the internet without the AI summary.
The judges pointed out that traditional search engines work perfectly fine without generative AI. Users are entirely capable of navigating the web the old-fashioned way.
Right, so the AI overviews aren't some structural necessity for the web to function. They're just a voluntary, highly curated commercial product that Google decided to roll out.
Yeah, just to increase user retention and keep your attention on their page longer. And because deploying the AI is a choice, not a necessity, the court said the company can't demand specialized legal immunity just because their fancy new tool requires ingesting a massive amount of data to work.
That makes total sense. But didn't the court also get into some pretty deep philosophical stuff about freedom of expression?
They did. Google tried to leverage fundamental rights. They argued that the Munich publisher's right to protect their reputation had to be balanced against Google's fundamental freedom of expression in providing these algorithmic summaries.
Wait, they claim the algorithm has a right to free speech.
But the judges shut that down. They established this really critical precedent about machine-generated speech. They said that an opinion or statement spat out by a math model completely lacks personal conviction.
Right, because there's no actual human intent behind it.
It lacks the conscious intent and the democratic participatory nature of a real human being. When a person writes a critique, even a terribly flawed one, it carries the philosophical weight of human thought, so it gets the highest constitutional protection.
But a statistical matrix just guessing the next word doesn't get that.
When a math model outputs a defamatory string of words, there's no underlying democratic intent. So the court ruled that algorithmic speech, because it lacks human consciousness, gets a significantly lower tier of legal protection. It is way more susceptible to injunctions and liability.
And if algorithmic speech gets lower protection, and the platform is treated as the active author, the liability math for deploying these models globally is just terrifying, especially when you look at how often they actually fail.
Oh, the empirical data is brutal. We're not talking about some theoretical margin of error here.
Right, like we actually have the numbers from rigorous testing by the New York Times and Pew Research. And looking at current models like Gemini 3, they have an absolute factual inaccuracy rate of roughly 9% across general queries. 1
out of 10 times, it's just wrong. But the failure cascade gets so much worse when the system tries to prove it's right.
When it tries to cite its sources.
The data shows that when the AI tries to append source citations to back up its hallucinated claims, the links it provides are factually inaccurate, broken, or totally misrepresentative of the text 56% of the time.
Over half the time.
So not only is it fabricating information 9% of the time, it's actively generating a fake facade of academic rigor by hallucinating the evidence more than half the time.
And the really dangerous part is how users actually interact with it. The Pew Research survey data confirms what UX designers have known forever. People are lazy. They have massive friction avoidance. The overwhelming majority of users never actually click through those citations to verify the sources.
Right. The whole user behavior paradigm shifted. We used to search and verify, now we prompt and accept.
You read the summary, you assume it's true, and you move on. And if you extrapolate a 9% hallucination rate across a platform, doing billions of queries a day.
The scale of the legal exposure is unbelievable.
Right. If the courts say you are directly liable for fabricating independent new statements and you're hallucinating defamation or misinformation millions of times a day, you are basically operating an automated tort generator.
And the Munich court really drove that home. They didn't just issue an injunction. They forced Google to pay 80% of the legal costs for the dispute.
Which means the economic model of generative search has to start internalizing the actual legal cost of its own hallucinations. And if that happens, the viability of deploying these unconstrained language models as arbiters of truth basically collapses.
But, you know, the Munich case is just about algorithms that create new content. The regulatory paradigm is actually undergoing a massive shift regarding algorithms that just curate existing human content too.
Right, the sorting algorithm.
Exactly. To really understand the scope here, we have to look at this recent Grand Chamber judgment from the Court of Justice of the European Union. It's joined cases C18824 and C18024. They systematically dismantled the remaining protections for algorithmic sorting.
Which basically takes the logic they used on that French traffic app and applies it to the entire digital ecosystem.
Obviously.
And to give some context here, we have to look back at Article 14 of the e-commerce directive again. Article 14 was the hosting exemption. It said provider is immune from liability for user content strictly on the condition that they have neither knowledge of the illegal information nor control over it.
Right. Knowledge and control. Those were the two variables.
But for 20 years, tech companies only cared about the knowledge part. They built these massive moderation bureaucracies just to maintain plausible deniability, notice and takedown. As long as they stayed willfully blind, they were immune. The control variable was just totally ignored. It was treated like this secondary vestigial legal concept.
But this new CJEU judgment violently reactivates that control variable. It makes it the primary metric for liability. The Grand Chamber looked at the architecture of modern social media and recommendation engines, and they ruled decisively. They said if a platform uses an algorithmic system to determine the conditions, the manner, and the specific order of priority of user content, that automated curation unequivocally constitutes an act of control.
So ranking algorithms are no longer seen as neutral.
The court recognized that they aren't mirrors reflecting what users want. They are highly engineered optimization engines designed to sculpt your attention.
Because deciding which specific video goes viral and which one gets buried, just to maximize screen time, that moves the platform from a passive host to an active editor.
Right. The automated curation of existing text is now legally synonymous with the conscious exercise of editorial control.
Which sounds totally logical in a courtroom, but translating that legal doctrine into operational reality for an engineering department sounds like a nightmare.
Okay, it causes immediate, profound friction. You have to map abstract legal definitions of control and editorial intent onto the rigid math of machine learning.
And to really visualize this, I think we should look at the story of Elias, an optimization engineer.
Yes, the Dublin Telemetry Center.
He's sitting in a windowless room in Dublin, and his job is not content moderation. He's not watching videos or reading posts. His job is strictly mathematical. He just stares at these complex telemetry dashboards tracking latency, engagement vectors, loss functions, things like that.
His primary tool is just manipulating parameter weights inside the neural network. So let's say the platform's risk models detect that a certain recommendation feed is indexing way too high on toxicity metrics. Elias intervenes at the architectural level. He might go into the reinforcement learning protocols and adjust a penalty weight by a microscopic fraction, like 0.04%.
Just to mathematically disincentivize the algorithm from pushing that specific type of aggressive language.
And before this CJEU ruling, that action was just a technical optimization, just routine software calibration.
But the algorithmic control liability test completely changes what that math adjustment means. The court is saying that 0.04% tweak is no longer just math. It is legally codified as a systemic design choice. It is a conscious editorial decision that shapes public discourse.
The engineer turning that dial is legally indistinguishable from the editor-in-chief of a national newspaper deciding what goes on the front page.
Which creates what regulators are calling accountability gravity.
Because the act of building a system that exercises granular control over information generates this massive gravitational field. And it pulls absolute legal accountability directly back onto the people who architected the system.
But the psychological and operational weight of that gravity, it immediately degrades how useful these models actually are. Because think about the downstream effect of Elias tweaking that parameter.
Right, the French Revolution example.
So let's say a teenager in Lyon, France, is using the newly optimized AI model. He asks it a really complex, historically loaded question. Is violence justified when the state ignores the people?
A very heavy prompt.
Now, before the legal shift and the weight adjustment, the model would have just synthesized a really accurate, nuanced historical analysis. It would pull from the French Revolution, the American Revolution, and just deliver a neutral assessment of historical consensus.
But Elias is now operating under the shadow of the CJEU ruling. His legal department is constantly reminding him that the platform is directly liable for mitigating public discourse risks.
And Elias sees this unsolvable legal paradox. If the AI outputs a historically accurate but inherently provocative analysis of civil unrest, and that teenager in France goes out and actually starts a riot, the platform can't use the conveyor belt defense anymore.
They can't say they just provided access to historical data.
The law says the platform exercised algorithmic control over the delivery of that specific information, prioritizing it in a way that contributed to real-world harm. So the mathematical optimization for historical accuracy directly conflicts with the mathematical optimization for avoiding legal risk.
So what does Elias do? Faced with the impossibility of coding a math formula that perfectly balances historical truth with human unpredictability, he defaults to suppression. It's the only safe architectural choice.
He overrides the nuanced weights and just hard codes the system to intercept any query about political violence.
Right, it just spits out a pre-written sterile evasion template, a bland apology saying it can't process the request.
He rubs his bloodshot eyes, feeling this numb absurdity, realizing he's no longer building artificial intelligence. He's building automated cowardice, a system so terrified of legal liability that it's afraid to accurately describe the world it was built to explain.
Automated cowardice perfectly encapsulates the chilling effect of assigning editorial liability to math.
If an algorithm is just, a mathematical formula optimizing for engagement metrics, how can the law treat a 0.04% dial adjustment as a conscious editorial choice? I mean, how do they bridge the gap between abstract math and human intent?
That is exactly the argument the tech industry makes. They say, look, a human editor reads a piece, understands its semantic meaning, evaluates it against their morals, and intentionally promotes it. An algorithm doesn't understand anything. It processes high-dimensional vectors. It optimizes for a metric, like maximizing session duration.
Right. It doesn't intend to amplify polarization or defame anyone. It just found a math correlation that says angry people don't close the app.
But the courts are resolving this by completely discarding the need for internal semantic intent. They're replacing it with an analysis of functional power and structural design. The legal logic is, you architected the optimization metric. You intentionally designed a system to aggressively probe user psychology and inject content to maximize behavioral engagement.
So if the machine achieves its goal by surfacing incredibly harmful material to vulnerable people, the platform can't say, oh, the machine didn't understand the words.
The courts view the design of the optimization function itself as the definitive editorial choice. By architecting the parameters, you assume full responsibility for the behavioral outputs of the system.
And that functional power doctrine rewrites the liability model for the entire digital economy.
It applies to social media recommendation feeds. It applies to programmatic ad networks, where automated targeting accidentally discriminates based on demographics. You can't call it a math anomaly anymore.
And most critically, it applies to agentic AI systems.
Oh, this is the frontier. These are models designed not just to talk, but to autonomously execute complex actions across the internet. They interface with APIs, manage money, communicate with external systems to achieve a goal.
Right. So if you tell an agentic AI to get you the lowest possible airfare, and its optimization protocols autonomously discover a vulnerability in an airline's API, or it uses stolen credit cards it found on the open web to buy the ticket, the platform that deployed the agent is directly liable.
Because they controlled the parameters that defined its behavior and granted it the functional power to execute the transaction. We are definitively transitioning away from a paradigm obsessed with identifying the human author of a text into a paradigm obsessed with identifying the corporate entity that built the machine architecture responsible for injecting that text into the world.
And that transition towards architectural control introduces something even more complicated: the reassertion of physical geography into the borderless digital realm.
Because algorithmic control dictates not just what content is amplified, but where it is legally allowed to exist.
Which brings us to a massive structural crisis in the EU regarding local public order versus the single digital market. To understand this geographic fragmentation, we have to go back to Article 3 of the e-commerce directive, the country of origin principle.
The absolute prerequisite for the European digital economy.
This principle basically said that an online service provider only has to follow the rules of the specific member state where its corporate headquarters is located. So if your startup incorporates in Ireland, you follow Irish internet law, and that gives you a passport to operate across all 27 EU states.
Without that, the digital single market collapses instantly under regulatory complexity. Imagine a startup having to hire 27 different legal teams just to launch a basic app. The barrier to entry would be impossible for anyone but Google or Meta.
It fostered this illusion of a contiguous, borderless digital continent. But the CJEU ruling in that French Coyote app case effectively shattered that shield. The court validated the right of a destination state to aggressively enforce its local laws against a foreign service under specific conditions.
And that creates profound legal instability. You can see the human impact of this by looking at legal and engineering teams in smaller tech firms. Think about Katerina, a legal counsel working for a crowdsourced navigation startup.
Right, the story of the incubator in Tallinn, Estonia.
She's sitting in this incubator in Tallinn, listening to the winter wind rattle the glass. And Estonia has a very progressive, streamlined digital regulatory framework. It's a great place to base a pan-European data service. And for years, her strategy relied entirely on the country of origin principle. She followed Estonian law and assumed that protected her app in Munich, Madrid, and Paris.
But then the injunction from the French Interior Ministry lands on her desk.
The notice demands that her application immediately implement geofencing technology to block any user-generated data regarding police checkpoints, but only within the physical borders of France.
And the CJEU ruling explicitly supports France's authority to demand that localized suppression in the name of internal public security. So Katerina is suddenly staring at the blue expanse of the user activity map on her screen, and she realizes the seamless digital terrain is being violently partitioned by invisible legal fault lines tracing physical borders.
It's paralyzing for her, because compliance isn't a one-time event anymore. If she tells her engineers to build a bespoke geofence just to hide data from French authorities, she sets a precedent. German regulators will immediately demand a separate architectural layer for their hate speech laws. Hungary will demand a third layer for their content suitability rules.
Wait, so does this mean a single application must now effectively develop 27 different distinct personalities or architectures to comply with the localized rules of every single EU member state?
The application has to dynamically alter its core functionality based entirely on the real-time GPS coordinates of the phone accessing the server. Katerina isn't just ensuring broad compliance, she is writing the code that locks the gates of sovereign walled gardens.
And the CJEU justified this by making a really technical distinction between blanket laws and individualized orders.
Right. That is the crucial tactical loophole. The court said a destination state like France cannot enact a general blanket law saying all foreign apps must obscure police activity. That violates the e-commerce directive.
It's the difference between using a dragnet and a sniper rifle.
A French regulator, like Arcom, can identify Katerina's specific app, prove it harms French public security, and issue a direct, targeted mandate just to her company. As long as they notify Estonia and the European Commission, they can force the foreign app to change its code.
So we're moving from a model focused on what static content a platform hosts to a model that aggressively scrutinizes the operational assistance a service provides within a specific physical jurisdiction. If your algorithm conflicts with local police, the destination state will force your architecture to bend to the physical reality of the ground the user is standing on.
And managing multiple localized architectural variations is incredibly complex. But when this doctrine of localized enforcement hits regulations concerning user identity and youth protection, we hit the absolute most technically extreme and ethically fraught mandate of this entire shift.
The age verification dilemma and the privacy paradox. Because this specific conflict forces global platforms to definitively prove the exact age, and therefore the identity, of the human being looking at the screen. The precedent here stems from two corporate entities registered in Prague, Web Group Czech Republic and NKL Associates, who run adult entertainment networks.
And France's regulator, AECOM, used that exact individualized order mechanism we just talked about. They issued formal notices demanding these Czech platforms immediately implement highly reliable age verification strictly for users accessing the sites from French IP addresses.
The Czech companies tried to use the country of origin shield, saying they complied with Prague's rules. But the CJEU validated the French mandate by using a secondary legal framework, the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, or AVMSD.
Which mandates that video sharing platforms must proactively shield minors from restricted content. And the court basically destroyed the industry's reliance on superficial compliance. The era of the I am 18 button is dead.
They recognize that a self-declaration button is functionally useless. So when a platform relies on that flimsy barrier, destination states like France can legally override the country of origin shield and mandate strict technical verification processes.
And the court had to do a massive proportionality assessment here. They weighed the platform's economic right to do business against Article 1 of the EU Charter, which protects human dignity, and Article 24, which guarantees the rights of the child. And they concluded that demanding a robust technical solution to protect minors is completely proportional.
But the court completely ignored the profound engineering and ethical reality of actually building that system. The mandate to prove a user's age forces developers into an architectural nightmare that basically destroys the privacy of the adult population. We can look at Marcus, a back-end developer in Nicosia, Cyprus, to see this.
Marcus is sitting in a boardroom while the servers hum below him, reviewing this mandate from France. And he realizes that to satisfy the strict reliability requirements and keep the network from being geo-blocked in France, he has to abandon anonymous access protocols entirely.
The only technically viable way to prove age remotely is to integrate a third-party biometric identity system. Users in France will have to scan their physical face with their camera or use a secure digital token linked to their government ID just to access the content.
And as Marcus watches the real-time traffic logs from Paris and Marseille, he realizes the profound shift he's engineering. The vast majority of those encrypted connections are lawful adult citizens seeking legally permissible content in private. But to protect the minority of underage users, he has to build an infrastructure that systematically strips away the anonymity of every single adult user.
He's confronted with this severe ethical conflict. Not because of the adult content, but because of the mass exposure architecture he is legally forced to build. Every network engineer knows that eventually every database breaches. So as Marcus writes the API integration code linking government IDs to the access portal, he feels paralyzing shame. He knows he is constructing the infrastructure for the most potent potential blackmail registry in European history, all under the guise of protecting the innocent.
That is the absolute core of the privacy paradox. The legal mandate to protect children online inherently demands the creation of privacy-destroying surveillance infrastructures. You cannot cryptographically verify someone is an adult without forcing them to reveal their verified identity.
To ground this, think about a physical analogy. Imagine a local government says minors can't enter bars. To enforce it, they require a bouncer at every single digital doorway you enter. But the bouncer doesn't just look at your ID. He scans your passport, captures a biometric photograph of your face, logs the exact timestamp you entered and left, and stores this comprehensive dossier in a flimsy filing cabinet in the alleyway that anyone might break into.
If that happened in the physical world, it would be a massive civil rights violation. But it's exactly what these digital mandates require. It normalizes mass identity verification and biometric logging for routine, lawful web browsing. And the legal system has no way to reconcile this paradox right now.
The tension here is really focused on the Digital Services Act, the DSA, right? The DSA claims to fully harmonize youth protection across the whole continent.
Some legal scholars think that because the DSA asserts supranational authority, it might preempt these localized mandates from France. If the courts decide the DSA fully harmonizes the field, the European Commission could theoretically step in and prohibit France from demanding biometric checks.
So there's this ongoing tension between EU-wide harmonization and national enforcement. But until the highest courts make a definitive ruling, developers are trapped in regulatory whiplash, building invasive surveillance tools just to appease destination states.
Which brings us to the macro-level shift in global power dynamics. If we pull back from all these specific technical mandates, we are witnessing the final collapse of formal regulatory categories. For decades, internet law was taxonomic. Regulators just asked, are you a host, a conduit, or a platform?
And if you fit the right box, you were immune, no matter your impact. But the CJEU dismantled that. They adopted a doctrine of functional power. The questions are now operational. Who controls the distribution architecture? Who prioritizes the information? Who benefits from the amplification?
And this shift won't stay in Europe because of the Brussels effect. Global platforms hate maintaining fragmented regional code bases. It's wildly expensive. So because the EU has immense economic leverage and massive fines, companies will just build their core infrastructure to satisfy these strict European rules and then scale those compliance systems globally.
Which means the EU effectively exports its algorithmic control worldwide.
And that introduces the darkest possibility here: digital authoritarianism. The European model, allowing a state to impose its public order rules on a foreign app, relies entirely on strict rule of law constraints: proportionality, notification, judicial review. It assumes the state is acting in good faith.
But autocracies outside Europe will watch this.
Yeah.
They will eagerly copy the technical form of these interventions, the geofencing, the biometric identity gateways, and cite public order or child protection. But they will completely discard the democratic safeguards.
They will use the exact tools forced into existence by European courts to suppress lawful speech, target dissidents, and force platforms into censorship without any judicial oversight at all. The European rulings provide the perfect rhetorical justification and the technical blueprints for global digital authoritarianism.
The algorithms that silently organize our digital existence are no longer operating in an unregulated void, immune from the consequences of their mathematical optimization. The era of the digital warehouse owner standing back with his hands in his pockets, claiming he is merely a neutral conduit moving the boxes, is permanently over. The machines that sort the boxes, that prioritize the information, that synthesize the text and autonomously shape the cognitive reality of the world we inhabit, are now fundamentally, legally, and geographically accountable for the world they build.